Strange and seemingly isolated incidents had happened in the days leading up to the massacre. I lived in a small farming community called Matheson, where everyone knew everyone. My neighbor, Steuben, owned a sprawling dairy farm. He must have been at least 70, but he still looked 60, a vigorous and healthy hard worker with wide blue eyes and thick salt and pepper hair. His land rose up in the rolling hills and gently babbling creeks of the surrounding woodlands. 3 days before, one of his cows had given birth. Steuben said the calf had been something from a nightmarish fever dream. It screamed and wailed constantly, gurgling in a sick, blood-choked voice. It had no skin, but instead looked like it was flipped inside out. The gleaming veins and slick, wet muscle thrumming with adrenaline and primal agony. It looked like a bloody, crying mass of pulsing organs. Steuben had grabbed his hunting rifle and put the poor creature out of its misery, shooting it in the back of its deformed, slanted head. It had no eyelids, and he said the filmy cataract eyes had stared up accusingly at him as he killed it. Though I didn't witness it myself, a few of my neighbors and friends had talked about seeing a meteor shower over town the night before the deformed calf's birth. Bright blue streaks like lightning flashed across the night sky. I wouldn't know the significance of this until much later, until it was far too late to do any good. One of my neighbors, who was 9 months pregnant at the time, ended up giving birth to a baby boy a couple days after the incident with the calf. The father told me that the infant had only lived for a few hours in intensive care, and it had been such a horrific sight that the mother and father could barely stand to look at its twisted, alien features. The doctors had told her it was an extreme case of something called Harlequin ichthyosis. I looked up the pictures of what he described, seeing pictures of mutated, skinless infants with dark blood vessels like tumors running down their chests and bulging, clown-like eyes that gleamed an infected red. It was around the same time that people began to notice the fish dying off in large numbers, their rotting bodies floating to the tops of ponds and streams all over the area. Fishermen said many of the lakes had become dead zones overnight, as if chemical weapons or high doses of radiation had contaminated them. The local and state governments started putting up signs all over town, warning people not to swim or eat anything they caught from the local waterways until the Department of Environmental Protection could test it for toxic contaminants. All of the state parks in the area were closed down temporarily as well. My wife Sophie and I had joked about finding a cabin out in the woods to wait out the rapture. In hindsight, that was probably far closer to the truth than either of us could have ever imagined. I awoke early the next morning, seeing the first razor-sharp shards of a sunrise peeking through the window. It was Saturday and I had the weekend off from work. I looked over, seeing my wife still sleeping soundly on the other side of the bed. Purple light like fresh bruises streamed in from a cloudless blue sky. I didn't know why, but something felt wrong. It took me a few moments to realize what it was. I didn't hear a single sound outside. Our house was surrounded by woods and swamps, and normally the birds would be singing their little heads off by now, but it sounded as dead as in the aftermath of a nuclear war. Even the insects had gone quiet. I crept out of bed, trying not to wake Sophie. I ended up getting dressed and making coffee and a bagel. Feeling restless, I decided to go out for a drive around the block. I hopped in my truck and slowly pulled out onto the empty street. After a few minutes, I drove past the local park. It had a brightly colored playground looming high in the air, though this early in the morning, it stood empty. A few joggers and random people walking their dogs lumbered through the foggy mist, circling around the paved trails of the park. A still pond coated with green scum stood at the center. I noticed how the eerie quiet extended out here as well. Besides the rumbling of my truck's engine and the distant barking of a dog, I might as well have been driving through a graveyard. I was glancing out the driver's side window and didn't see the young woman covered in blood slinking out onto the street until the last second. She dragged a broken leg behind her, the sharp points of bone poking out through the skin. Her head turned to look at me moments before I collided with her. She was completely naked, but that wasn't the strange thing. There was something wrong with her face. Long black tendrils like spidery legs jutted out of her mouth, her nose, and her ears. Her eyes looked like they had been removed or eaten away, and more skittering, jointed things oozed out of those. She was crying scarlet tears from her dark, empty sockets. Orange pus and clotted gore dripped down her chin from the open wounds, staining her lower body in rivulets of drying filth. I tried to slam on the brakes, but it was far too late. My front fender smashed into her waist. After that, everything seemed to happen very fast. Her body flew up with a shattering of glass, but the woman never screamed or made a sound. Her face remained as blank and slack as that of a puppet's. A spiderwebbing of cracks flew across the windshield as her body rolled over the truck, flying up over the top of it and crashing down on the road with a wet, bone-shattering sound. Holy shit, I cried, my tires fishtailing wildly with a squealing of rubber as I came to a stop. I heard people screaming in the nearby park now. I thought they had seen the accident, but I was too focused on the destroyed body of the woman to care. Hyperventilating, I climbed out of the truck, running over to her side. She jerked on the road like a dying hornet, her shattered limbs twisting with a grinding of broken bone. Her empty eye sockets stared blankly up at the vast blue sky, the spidery legs twitching faster. The right half of her chest appeared caved in, and she continuously coughed up frothy streams of bright red blood. I immediately pulled out my cell phone. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911, never looking away from the dying woman laying in front of me. "Hello," a woman's voice said. "Hello, I need help. I think I killed." This is a pre-recorded message. Emergency services are temporarily suspended in your local area due to a federally declared state of emergency. This is not a test. Please stay inside for the duration of the emergency. Assistance is on the way. Do not panic. Your government has everything under control. If you notice any unusual life forms in your local area, do not approach them. Do not try to kill or harm them in any way. Give them as much distance as you can. If possible, try to seal all windows, doors, and cracks. Your area is now a federally mandated quarantine zone. Until you can be safely evacuated, stay in your home and await rescue. Thank you for your cooperation in this difficult time. What? I screamed into the phone. There's someone dying here. I need an ambulance. In response, the message started to repeat, the cool robotic female voice sounding as calm as if it were announcing a sale on produce at a grocery store. I ended the call, looking around hopefully for someone who might be able to help. It was only then I noticed the bloodshed spreading all around me. "What is that?" a female jogger cried, pointing at the sky. My eyes widened in confusion and horror as I tried to comprehend what I saw there. No one was looking at me or the woman I had run over. No one had even noticed in all of the chaos. A writhing, twisting black mass of thrumming flesh stretched over the forest, growing at a rapid rate over the tops of the trees. The mass was a few feet across, lumpy and wet. It seemed to be passing fluid through its main body, like some enormous intestines uncoiling out above the world. It stretched upwards like something from Jane and the Beanstalk, growing and curving back down towards other tube-like masses. Every few feet along the fleshy, worm-like mass, hollow protrusions as long as railroad spikes shot out. They reminded me of spider legs, jointed and covered with fine, dark hairs. They skittered constantly as the central body continued growing. Even from the street I could hear the wet, sucking sounds the legs made as they constantly flexed and relaxed, dripping black sludge like dirty oil from their glossy skins. As more and more hollow tendrils spiraled out of the eerie flesh, I saw the movements of the spidery tendrils were not random. They would spray thick, black fluid in the direction of anything that moved. A man and his dog at the far perimeter of the park were totally covered in the strange goo. As they continued thrashing and fighting, the tendrils kept shooting more sludge at them. After a few seconds, it covered his face like an opaque mask. The man clawed at his eyes and mouth, trying to get it off. The dog gave high-pitched squeals of terror and pain as it rolled on the ground, its legs kicking randomly in the air. Its fur had become a soaking black mass of goo. Throughout the air, I smelled a disgusting odor that I immediately recognized. It was the slightly sweet, chlorine-like smell of semen, but so concentrated and pungent that I almost retched. As more and more of the black goo sprayed down at the screaming, writhing people, the smell intensified, so thick that I could taste it on the back of my throat. As I stood staring, open-mouthed, watching the stragglers in the park get consumed and covered by this strange sight, something grabbed my ankle. I jumped, yelling in panic. I looked down, seeing the twitching body of the woman I had hit changing before my very eyes. Her blue lips chattered, the broken shards of teeth biting deeply through her bloody lips. The thin, crooked legs skittering out of her mouth, eyes, nose and ear continued lengthening before my eyes. A couple heartbeats later, I saw what they attached to. 5 of them ripped their way out of her jerking, dying body, looking like mutated alien spiders. They plopped wetly onto the pavement below. Their sharp points of legs skittered and ripped through the seizing woman's mutilated flesh, sending drops of blood flying in all directions. The alien spiders looked like some eldritch combination of an infant and a black widow. Each of them had a fat, round central mass, the same color as the woman's pale skin. The pink flesh was stretched as tight as a snare drum. It looked like mice were living inside the thick liquid of the creature's central bodies, pressing against the thin membrane with the fleeting impression of tiny legs and gnashing faces. Dozens of the jointed, skittering legs jutted out from their thrumming flesh. Looking up at me, I saw big, blue human eyes on their twisted faces. They were bloodshot, the pupils dilated and wild. The fleshy orbs had no nose, but each had a pair of human-like lips twisted up into a savage snarl beneath the massive eyes. Hundreds of thin, hollow needles emerged from their gnashing mouths. Instinctively, I backpedaled to the driver's door. Each of the spiders started wailing like a crying baby, their mouths opening in dissonant shrieks. They turned towards me, their wild, insane eyes meeting mine. At that moment, I felt like I had been plunged into a nightmare. I had no time to think as they pushed themselves off the ground, flying high in the air with a sudden fury. Those very human mouths filled with too many sharp black needles flew straight at my face. I ducked at the last moment, hearing them smash into the side of the truck. There was a ringing of metal as they left deep dents in the body, each about the size of a baseball. I leapt inside, slamming the door behind me as more spidery creatures flew up, smacking hard into the glass. Their wild faces stayed stuck there for a long moment, staring in at me with a gnashing of teeth and an oozing of more black sludge. I started the truck. As the air conditioner clicked on, blowing air from outside into the cab, the smell of thick semen wafted in, cloying like ammonia. I pulled a U-turn, burning out in my rush to get back home and check on Sophie. I needed to get us out of this cursed town. As I passed by the park, I noticed that nothing moved now. The bright summer day started to go dark overhead. Looking up, I saw more and more black, worm-like masses growing over everything, partially blocking out the sun in their rapid growth. Like cancerous cells, the disparate life forms connected, their spidery legs skittering faster with a renewed vigor. Hundreds more small spiders were crawling out of the park, but not all had human faces. One of them had a dog's eyes and black lips, its central mass furry and yellow like that of a golden retriever. Nothing moved on the streets now except the spiders and the black, worm-like masses stretching above our heads. I sped down the streets, seeing pale faces peeking out of windows. As my truck sped ahead, it continuously got sprayed with black sludge from above. It covered my windshield like some kind of hellish snow. Within a couple minutes, it was nearly impossible to see anything. When I tried to use the windshield wipers to clean it off, it just smudged and bubbled. Cursing, I tried to see through a smaller and smaller portion of the glass until I was forced to stop, only a few hundred feet away from my home. The sludge continued raining down on me, covering every single window, until I was submerged into blackness. I breathed hard in the sudden darkness, my heartbeat roaring in my ears. I had no idea what to do. I heard soft thuds land against the outer body, more mutated spiders throwing themselves at the only moving thing on this dead, apocalyptic street. I tried to inch forward slowly, like a blind man trying to drive. I was moving in the right direction overall, but at any moment, I knew I would hit something. Moving along at a few miles an hour, I heard the crunch a few seconds later. I must have hit one of the cars parked along the side of the street. I looked through the truck for anything possibly useful in this situation. I wished I at least had a gun, but I had nothing here except an old, rusted box cutter in the glove department. I didn't even have a mask or anything to put over my face. I refused to wear masks for any reason, though I might have made an exception for this situation. I found a plastic bag covered in dirty streaks of grime underneath the seat. Grabbing the box cutter and the plastic bag, I prepared myself to get out and run. I knew it was absolutely insane, but I had to get back home. I couldn't stay in this truck until I simply starved or dehydrated to death. If the US government was anywhere near as useful at fixing this situation as they were at anything else they tried to do, then I knew they would be no help. With the efficiency of government services, I figured they might get here sometime around next year and spend hundreds of billions of dollars doing so after every single person in this town had already rotted down to skeletons. I inhaled deeply, putting the plastic bag over my head like some sort of cheap Halloween mask. I ripped 2 tiny holes for the eyes, hoping it would still do some good. Grabbing the box cutter in one trembling hand, I flung open the door, running out onto the street. The black masses stretching overhead made it as dark as a solar eclipse outside. They covered the roofs of every home, wound their ways through trees and branches and slunk across creeks like organic bridges. The entire pulsating massy flesh constantly shimmered and gurgled. I heard sounds of wet sliding above my head. I looked around frantically, seeing my house only 100 feet away. I sprinted as fast I could, zigzagging wildly. Something liquidy and thick crashed directly next to me, a massive sputtering black goo reeking of semen. The strange tendrils continued shooting wads of this alien material. I knew I couldn't make it to the house. Then I heard a cry from nearby. "Walt, in here," someone cried, a wavering old man's voice. I looked up, seeing my neighbor Steuben standing in his open doorway only a dozen feet away. I leapt towards him, climbing up the steps on all fours and flinging myself through the door with every ounce of strength I possessed. I heard more wet, thudding sounds as that strange alien goo continued covering the path behind me. I rolled through the door, falling forward and slamming my head into the wall. My vision turned black for a moment. I swam through the pain and confusion, hearing Steuben slam and lock the door behind me. I ripped the plastic bag off my head, breathing hard and covered in sweat. My heart pounded in my chest, frantic as a cornered, panicked animal. I looked down, seeing the box cutter still clutched tightly in my hand, my knuckles white with tension. I slipped it in my pocket. "Sophie," I cried, breathless. "I need to get to Sophie." Steuben came over slowly in his typical long-sleeve plaid shirt and blue jeans, looking down at me with his flat, blue eyes. "It's okay, Walt," he said calmingly. "Sophie's here." I looked up surprised. "What? Where?" I asked, confused. "Why is she here?" "When everything started, she said she got scared and saw you weren't home. She came here when the announcements began on the radio and TV. She's in the back room right now." He knelt down, extending a withered hand towards me. "Come on up, I'll bring you to her." My heart soared with waves of bliss. I scrabbled to my feet. "Thank you so much, Steuben," I cried in ecstasy, grateful that Sophie was alive and okay. He put out a hand, pointing down the hallway. "She's in the room at the back," he said. "Go see her." I nodded happily, running forward. His slow, plodding footsteps followed behind me. The floorboards creaked ominously as I flung open the door. I saw Sophie there, naked and bound with strands with razor wire. Fresh streams of blood dribbled down her smooth, pale flesh. Her mouth was gagged, her eyes huge and wild. The back window was open, and I saw alien spiders slinking through. Some were a combination of human and spider, while others had dog, squirrel, cat or raccoon features. Yet every single one gave the same ghastly aura of sickness, the smell of thick semen in the air. "Sophie," I cried as one of them skittered up on her face, its black needles dripping drops of mutating sludge onto her eyes and nose. She shook her head wildly from side to side, trying to clear it. Her panicked, muffled sobs filtered through the gag, ripping at my heart. I heard the cocking of a gun behind my head. I turned slowly, seeing Steuben standing there with an insane rictus grin splitting his old face, aiming a .45 pistol at my forehead. "Steuben, what the fuck?" I cried, my hand instinctively crawling nearer to my pocket with the box cutter. He smiled. "Get into the room with that stupid bitch," he said, "or I'll kill you both." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "I never did anything to you," he shrugged. "It's part of my job with the cleaners," he said simply. "After the meteorite hit and started contaminating the local environment, the government asked me to experiment a bit on the locals if I could, measure the time it takes for the reaction to occur." He pointed to cameras and audio recorders located all around the room. "You and your wife will be the first scientific subjects for the fungus. If we can control this, imagine how powerful of a biological weapon it would be. It could take out a whole country in days." I closed my hand around the box cutter, ready to make my move. "Okay, I'll go," I pleaded, nodding slowly. "Just don't kill me." Steuben smiled grimly as I leapt forward, yanking the box cutter out of my pocket and slicing upwards at his neck. The pistol went off instantly. I felt a burning pain in my left shoulder as the bullet exploded through the top of it, blood instantly soaking my shirt. With a battle cry of pain and anger, I forced the blade into the side of his neck with all my strength. It cut through his jugular vein easily, the skin separating a moment later. A waterfall of blood poured down his chest. He stumbled back, grabbing at his spurting neck. The pistol fell to the floor with a metallic clatter. Looking at me with dead, surprised eyes, he fell slowly forward. I looked back, seeing Sophie's face covered in black sludge. She was suffocating, her lips turning blue. Spiders crawled over every inch of her exposed flesh. When their strange, alien eyes met mine, the ones closest jumped in my direction. I backpedaled quickly, slamming the door shut. I heard them slam against its other surface with soft crashes. I took Steuben's gun, searching his house meticulously for something that might help me survive. I felt sick about Sophie's death, but once she had become infected, I knew she was gone. The moment that black goo entered someone's body, it seemed they were beyond help. I tried to slow the bleeding from my shoulder, bandaging it as best as I could. I felt pieces of bone splinters rubbing in the wound as I tightened it, gritting my teeth against the pain. The bullet appeared to have gone through the top of my shoulder, missing the arteries but shattering the bone. I would have to use my right hand for everything for a while, I thought as pain like battery acid shrieked from the wound. In Steuben's garage, I found a strange vehicle. It looked like a bulldozer, but it had cameras on the outside, connected to a TV in the center console. There were special high-pressure water jets pointed at the cameras to clean them off. It was as if Steuben had known what was coming and had made plans to escape. I looked at the plates, seeing they were government plates. They said the vehicle was federal property. Steuben's story started to seem more and more true. Had he actually been a member of some secret government agency experimenting on US citizens? I played around with the bulldozer for a few minutes, finding out how to operate it and keep the cameras running. It took significantly longer with only one hand and with the many injuries and bruises covering my body, but I forced myself to ignore the pain. Once I knew how it worked, I turned it on, sealing the exterior, feeling a combination of bliss at escaping and sickening horror at Sophie's fate. I crashed through the door of Steuben's garage, ambling the bulldozer down his driveway. The windows were instantly covered in black goo, but through the aid of the cameras, I could still see. Making my way slowly forward, I left the den of horrors behind, driving through the dead streets of Matheson towards freedom.